now, it's all about the government retreat that's taking place in Naivasha. We're calling it government because we've seen several arms of government that have made their way there and made presentations or made speeches or have been consulted. We saw members of National Assembly. Today, the Council of Governors was represented. Of course, the cabinet meeting there, day 2. My guests are still with me, Professor Margaret Kobia. We've got Dr. Abraham Rugo and Wanjiru Gikonyo. So, Professor Kobia, let's talk a little bit about your experience with the retreats. You know, you'd earlier told us that each of these has a theme, and therefore that would determine, you know, who's brought on board. But what are your reflections of cabinet retreats that you have attended? Give us a fly-on-the-wall experience. How candid are they? How did you perhaps have to prepare for a cabinet retreat? What are those like?
Thank you, Yvonne. The cabinet retreat is very different from a cabinet meeting in the sense that every ministry takes time to prepare the agenda of the cabinet retreat in line with what is their plan looking like. Therefore, when they go for retreat, for example, the president himself will really give a clear vision of what he wants to see and a mission of his government. And I think that's why he brought in even representation from the parliament, so that I think everybody can get this communication at the same time. With that painting of the vision and the vision, mission and vision of the president, he also articulates what are some of the achievements you want to see in these pillars. I think in this particular, in Kibaki's government, we were looking at the Vision 2030 in detail. So after the president has talked, somebody will make a presentation of Vision 2030. You come back to the pillars, and in each pillar, you'll be able to say which ministries are taking the flagship. And then the minister will present in terms of where are we and what else is required to be able to move the flagship to the next stage. Maybe you may have reported on, maybe on this particular road, we are 50%. Therefore, you must show what you're going to do to realize that particular project within the time frame given. Therefore, it is very important that every member of the retreat who are supposed to speak, because not everybody who speaks, there are those who have come to listen. There are those who may be consulted to come and present a well, solid, thought-out paper on a particular area of government, so that the cabinet, the PSs can listen and be able to see is that advisory necessarily within the framework of the plan that the government want to present. After maybe an advisory of that nature from a think tank or from a consultant is recent, then the cabinet and the PSs have an opportunity to ask questions and clarification, and also then see how does it fit within their ministry. Let me even also say that many times the role of the ministry is to formulate policies and regulations which lead to laws. Therefore, even when the ministers want to be seen that they are working very hard, I think in this retreat they should be able to see how will you be judged as a ministry that you have been able to perform. You must be able to demonstrate the number of policies that the ministry has been able to develop, the number they have reviewed, or the advisory that they have given to the president, because that's the role of the cabinet ministers to advise the president. Therefore, in those particular, when it's in a retreat, they have more time than when they're having a cabinet meeting of 2 hours. In a retreat, they have 2 days complete, and they are able to kind of ask really candid questions. The ones that have attended, the cabinet secretaries have been able to say, on this particular agenda item, maybe, let's say, policy on education. These are the challenges that we are facing, and the other members of the cabinet. Because even if you are Minister of Education, even the other cabinet ministers must be able to understand the policy that you have shared or you have given them before to read, so that they can give you input. So it is that is what goes on in the street. where the president paints the picture, then the cabinet presents where they are in terms of evaluation, then the expert input, and then thereafter they will be able, on each maybe section of the presentation that has been made, they will have very clear deliverables of how they move to the next.
Forward afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, but it's true that I think in my case where I sat in the cabinet, also it is an opportunity to board with other cabinet ministers. You don't really sit in the same place all the time, but maybe during the lunch hour or even during some time, you are able to engage with your colleague and ask a question. When you face this problem, when you're developing this policy, what are some of where did you get some help? So I think it's very, very important that they will be candid enough, because if they are not candid to address the challenges that this country is facing, then there will be no trust to the government. And because this is what Kenyans want. But let me also say, whatever the cabinet ministers' participation may be, or their input, it must be within the constitution and within the law. Because you may want to do something as a cabinet minister, but you need to consult the Attorney General office, other cabinet ministers, so that you are within the law and the constitution, so that you don't end up making a decision that end up being disqualified at the court of law. Okay. So it's important to be very candid, and I hope that is opened by the leader of the retreat to make people relax and be able to speak, because Kenyans have given them this opportunity to serve in honor. Therefore, not being candid enough and raise the issue really that the government is struggling with is very important. I would also say, Yvonne, every government has got its own challenges, and it builds on the previous government. The challenges are different, brought by the ever-changing world of work. Therefore, you cannot say maybe His Excellency President Kibasi's government and the Uhuru Kenyatta government and this one of His Excellency Ruto, there is, you can really compare. But however, there are some principles which stay in terms of performance, that there will be clear indicators. How is the government serving its people in terms of improving the quality of people for Kenyans, improving education, improving health, infrastructure, agriculture. That must be visible.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Good point. Wanjiru, are those indicators visible today?
I would say, first of all, people will compare. That's human nature. These are our governments. We're a democracy, and Kenyans exercise their democracy by critiquing governments. We might not be as active as citizens in doing some of the other accountability parts that we should, but we definitely critique and we do compare. Are the indicators visible? In some ways, I would say there's been a reduction in the visibility of indicators in some way, but in another way, this president is very interesting because he keeps talking about better, about his plans, about his objectives. He's very engaging. I think even our media discourse has become more focused on development. Corruption used to be a very dominant. It was corruption, it was political contestation, and then small footnote on development. Now, development is the main discussion. So in that way, it's visible. I think it's less visible in that I may have missed it, but I've been looking out for the public expenditure reports that we had become used to, especially under the NARC administration. They were generating more regular public expenditure review reports. The last comprehensive expenditure review that we've had, I think, is a 2017 one, and then we had some work done around COVID. So, how is government making decisions without comprehensive expenditure review in this day? So you get a sense that there's more political decision-making, and that's very unnerving. I also looked around when I was preparing for this to see what the public sector has prepared in terms of reports, and there's an annual public sector report on Article 10 and Article 232, and it was very interesting, and they have some indicators, and if you allow me, I'll just try and pick some. Number one, 32.4% of eligible officers who are entitled, only 32.4% have received their pensions. So they were looking at a whole raft of things. Only 14.9% of institutions that took part in the performance evaluation had complied with the 30% AGPO requirement. Only 11% have adopted public participation guidelines. 33% did not submit reports to PPRA.
Yeah.
Overall performance, about 66% received a medium performance, 68% low achievers. I don't know how they were scoring percent that went over 100%, but you get a gist of it. Good governance, transparency and accountability, overall performance, 32.2%. What are the ones? So there are some indicators that the public sector performance is actually very below par. The performance contracting that was launched with much aplomb. In fact, performance contracting keeps getting launched in Kenya.
Yeah.
Launched and relaunched, and it works for a bit and then it's forgotten. So this report says that it hasn't quite taken root. Looking at the media reports, they actually said there was a statement that they are now going to do the performance contracts. And I thought, but we witnessed signing of performance contracts. So we are short on evidence. The other, maybe a final point I'd like to make is that even at county level, there is a struggle on evidence, on data to measure. And there's a World Bank report again. It's not a comprehensive PER, but it's it's probably the most comprehensive report we have on the performance of devolution of counties. It's a 2022 report, and it says the same thing. We don't have data to be able to measure at the granular level. So apart from the data that KNBS produces, we are not getting a sense of service delivery. So what do we have to go on? Only political statements and the feeling. So if I go to a hospital and don't get medicine, there is a media report. That's the impression that's created. So in terms of performance of the public service, we are in trouble. The World Bank report said that there are major challenges in terms of health staffing, in terms of staffing, in all the main delivery sectors of county governments. There's misalignment, there's morale issues, performance concerns out of the morale issues. So when we talk about the fiscal crunch, let us also recognize we are having a performance challenge. And it's our hope that this will be discussed in this conference, but chances are we might hear more about better and less about how better gets implemented. Maybe last point. Better functions are in the water sector, in the health sector, in agriculture sector. You're talking about markets. All these are county functions. So the big missing link for me is how are we doing a performance review of governments without performance review of county governments, and this then becomes one report. And we are seeing a rolling back of devolved functions. I mean, the COG finally made a statement on this.
Yeah, I think it was perhaps the strongest statement we've seen.
You know, because they've been very, uncomfortable, but very quiet. And I think they realized this playing good politics is not working. So we are seeing a serious rolling back of devolution, actually a killing of devolution. And the way government reports, and this is not new to this government, this has been the pattern, national government reports as though it's the only government, forgetting that citizens feel government at the county level, because that's where the services that matter to citizens are being implemented.
Yeah, and we're talking about that and the fiscal space and the economy. Today, there was lots of optimism that we saw coming out of that. Dr. Ugo, we had started the conversation and, talked about what has, I think, dominated our space is our external debt. How much do we owe? Who do we owe? When is the date? I mean, I think everybody is June 2024. But you were saying there is more to our economy than just the debt, even though that is what was spoken about to a great extent today at this cabinet meeting. So what else do you think they should be discussing about our economy beyond, yes, okay, we've had a buyback of the Eurobond 2014, and we've now gotten another one. We are, out of the woods as far as default goes. But what else should we be talking about with respect to our economy?
Yeah, thank you so much, Yvonne, and thanks colleagues for this. It's interesting because there seems to be the discussion around debt. Let me just start there. Is more of we have dodged a bullet, but we are not discussing about the other bullets that are coming. How will we dodge them, as it were? An economy, from where I see it, is a factor of a couple of things. One is that you have the productive sector. In this case, we are talking about agriculture, we are talking about manufacturing and value addition and everything that goes with that. I'm unable to pronounce better, the beta, depending on how you...
the bottom up.
Transformation agenda.
Yes, yes.
I think it prioritizes those things, but when you come to the actual allocation of funds, including the budget policy statement, which we are now reviewing, we've spent the whole day today actually looking at it, those are not the sectors you see getting additional resources. If anything, some are stagnant, if not, declining in terms of how much they are getting allocation, and almost consistent. And yet that is such a big part of our productive sector, because that is where you first of all have a lot of subsistence, farmers and the like, majority of whom are women and single person-led households, as it were, and that's important. But then on the other side, you also need to have a people that are able to consume what is being produced, and that's a factor of incomes. So any retreat right now, what is the topmost agenda right now in every household is cost of living. And therefore, you expect a discussion on how will you bring down the cost of living. It's how you approach that balance of, are we putting money? We've talked a lot about, value addition, we're operating around the value chain of leather and all these products. But on the ground, is that where we are actually putting our money?
Is it?
No, it's not where we are putting our money. And I just have said the allocations year on year, and just looking at them today, actually seems to be at the same level that we have manufacturing actually as a total part of our GDP or our national wealth has actually been going down. Which yet that is the area we are saying
it's labor intensive.
It's labor intensive. That's where you can create. And even the discussion around the 300,000 jobs that you'll create by building houses, you still require a lot of manufacturing input if you are going to build the local economy. Otherwise, then you end up having another SGR kind of a situation where the worker, the cement, the metal, all of it is imported, including the money. So I think it's important that that discussion becomes the dominating discussion, because right now, if you're not going to put incomes in households, then you're not going, first of all, to resolve the taxation quagmire. And why is that important? Because of the four major taxes that the country has, income tax, VAT, excise, and import, they all depend on income tax. Income tax is actually the one that is declining.
Right.
Which tells you that both corporates, in terms of legal bodies, in terms of businesses, are not performing, and you just need to go out there. But how would I have approached this kind of conversation? Suppose I was the president. I still hope I will be one day. At least I am in my household. Would it have been too much to ask Kenyans' input on what they think about what should be the agenda of that retreat? Get input. Now we have a lot of technology. We've invested in a lot of technology. There's a way in which you can actually get feedback And I say this because, like today, I mean, at IBP, we had a forum where we had about almost 300 people from across the country, all contributing to different aspects of the discussion. That did not come. So basically, then it ends up being, same people speaking to this, an echo chamber kind of a discussion of the same people speaking to the same people over the same issues and how you see them. Perhaps it would have been helpful to have an input. And because even members of parliament were coming, perhaps you had 2-3 months ahead of this and therefore get that kind of... Okay. The second thing that I wanted to speak about is and Prof here has done much more work in that area than even myself, is basically productivity within the public sector. And why that is important is because public sector right now is the #1 employer. When you look at just formal employment, as it were. Of course, then private sector comes following. That is important because we now have a government approach to service delivery that seems to suggest that government will produce everything. The budget policy statement, again referring back to it, creates a new 13 institutions of different kinds. Breaks National Oil Corporation into 3, revitalizes a few other things, wants to build houses, wants to provide education, wants to provide healthcare, and breaks it into 4, and everything. If you don't have a productive public sector, at a minimum, operating the way we are operating right now, then it means you're basically putting in your money,
but you're not getting
anything in return. Okay. Of course, there are questions as to whether that is where we should actually be putting in efforts, or whether we should actually be promoting, more private investment, because that's where you create employment. That's where you collect taxes as it were.
Yeah, and I think that might be a good moment to have you come in, Prof, to just talk about the performance of the public sector in general. Where are we at with that, and what can we do to increase the productivity of the public sector?
Thank you, Yvonne. I do agree with the sentiment given by my colleagues that unless we have a productive, measurable sector, then we might not be very sure where we are putting our money. You may recall that the government is the major kind of sector that gives a lot of money to the country. But at the same time, the government can only be able to manage productivity through the people that it has by making sure that the plans that we have already indicates the structure that can deliver the productivity. I do agree public service, for one reason or the other, has not performed as it should. But at the same time, I would like also us to appreciate governments wound over their responsibilities, the way they work, their goals change overnight because of maybe other intervening extra out of their plan, that sometimes you may be focusing to do something, but all of a sudden there's a drought. Therefore, goals in government change overnight, and the government has to take care of its people. Therefore, the area of productivity, we may want to, maybe in this particular retreat, to spend a little more time, and I've heard the president talk a lot about productivity, but it has not come out very clear. Because even in the performance contract, where every department is supposed to indicate what are they going to deliver, sometimes it has fallen short because of other reasons, like we did not get the check on time, or we did not have the staff. So I think to enhance our productivity, we must be able to map the whole value chain, so that from what we want to produce to the staff who are supposed to, they are facilitated, so that it is very clear that we are all moving towards the same direction to deal with this issue of productivity. Let me also say that many times we read that maybe in the report that the government maybe in the next year is going to grow by 5%. That is financial growth. But when you look at the social impact, we are not seeing it. If there are so many children out of school, if when you go to health sector, you don't find medicine. So we must go back and ask ourselves, what does success look like in health sector? From the time I enter to the gate of a hospital to the time I go out of the hospital, what is that experience? So that we are not saying maybe we get doctors, we fix that, but at the same time the medicines are not in there. So that measuring that productivity has not been easy, but I think having a retreat of this nature, then the cabinet must ask ourselves, how are we going to measure productivity across the value chain, and also both the national government, the link between the national government, the county government, and not miss that line of sight where Kenyans are expecting to have a better quality of life, unless we have productivity that cannot happen.
But allow me just to jump in quickly and ask, should we really be pushing in this day and age for a government that actually tries to produce everything? Is government the most efficient to produce houses, to produce certain services that basically, and to participate within the economy in that sense? Because you see, government's capacity to run is based on taxes and borrowing and some grants. It's not necessarily in producing certain goods that you sell. That's my concern. Yet it's the private sector with the necessary facilitation and support that basically can be able then to create that kind of environment with the efficiency that is required. And even the stories you've just ran today, with that level of entitlement, and which basically leads to corruption and theft of public resources, is that where honestly we should be putting in when you have the kind of numbers of well-educated, well-trained people who have no opportunities, to pursue income generation, as it were? I think it's an important question.
I think I would like to respond to that, because I think government all over, including this one of Kenya, I don't think they want to pause as if they can be able to produce everything. Government is never known to produce, is known to create the right environment in terms of policies, ease of doing business, then the private sector. And I think you must have seen government over the time having a lot of consultative meeting with the private sector, KEPSA, because we do, and I think they do understand that government cannot be able to do everything. Government is specific just to produce that environment that makes private sector be able to thrive and actually even create jobs. The whole issue of unemployment, government knows, I think we can't even employ more than 800 people.
Right. Yeah.
And
the civil service.
The people in the SMEs and other sectors, they cover around 18 million. Therefore, that alone, appreciation of that and the retreated thinking, then in that case, what can government do and do better? And what can be done by somebody else. All
right, that's an important one. I want us to shift the conversation a little bit and to talk about cabinet, some of the decisions that have been made by government and those policies then going into parliament and legislation. Wanjiru, let's talk about accountability and perhaps transparency with the people, maybe more importantly, public participation and process. We've seen quite a few of government initiatives being challenged within a court of law, be it the Social Health Insurance Fund, the Housing Levy, the Finance Act itself, and even e-Citizen, at least a portion of it with the school fees. What does this tell us about how government is running this and how accountable they are to the people? What's causing these constant challenges of government initiatives, and should this be something that they are discussing there in terms of the process of doing it, the sort of legal advice that they are getting, around these initiatives that they plan?
Yeah, I'd want to say, if you look at it at a broad level, is we've had 10 years of an administration that voted in the no camp of this constitution, and we have a continuation of that. And this, therefore, becomes a mindset issue, an ideological posture towards the Constitution. And a lot of what is challenged has to do with, functional roles, with mandates, with power. We've moved away from the all-powerful presidency and the all-powerful national government to devolved government. So some of these stoppages have to do with government encroachment by the national executive of functions that don't belong to them. And, public participation goes in line with that, obviously. And so government is, I think, we are in a struggle. And then, they say the process of democracy is an ongoing negotiation and struggle, and that negotiation is taking place in the courts because government is not listening to public participation. I think Dr. Rugo, you know, this is my colleague, Dr. Rugo. We take him so for granted. We know he's a gem, but we call him Rugo.
Yeah.
As he mentioned, the housing levy. The housing levy has been I think a lesson in how not to make policy. One, there was no policy. Two, it was a tax, then it was a levy, this is government making important decisions that impact household incomes on the fly, and then coming up with solutions that are criticized and critiqued by everybody, including their own experts. So housing levy, I agree, is an example of government getting into the public, of a need, because we have a need to convert rent payment into mortgages so that you can build up ownership of houses, of homes. But how do you do that? Is it by governments entering into that space or government enabling? So there, then also this, the single, the pay bill number, the digitization process where even university students are supposed to put money. You then ask, you have principles in the Constitution of decentralization, first of all. What is the impact of centralizing? Because when you talk about decentralization, there are three functions you're talking about. You're talking about finance, which is now being centralized. You're talking about administration, which is not being talked about. And then you're talking about political, which is the public participation and is also the legislative oversight. So we are having a problem with this government that they keep talking about revenue. And then they're not talking, revenue doesn't exist in isolation. It takes place in systems and in a context and for a purpose. So if you centralize all these funds, what happens to all those officers who are then administrating this money? What happens to the principle of subsidiarity and the principle of administration and also the public accountability that comes with decentralization? So the point is, we have a government that's very uncomfortable, that is amassing power under the guise of efficiency, that has some good schemes or good ideas, but the way they're implementing them falls short. And I always give this example that the NARC administration made a political promise of free primary education. Mm-hmm. And the Orange Democratic Party said it was our idea, they stole it, but it doesn't matter. Through the elections, this promise was made. And when they came to power, they then took that initiative and gave it to KIPRA and told KIPRA, process this for us and tell us how to implement, because there are institutions that exist to do policy. So the problem we're having is we are moving from an idea into implementation, often through some regulation, some directive, and then the legislation is crafted after the fact. Yeah. And that legislation doesn't have a policy framework. The absence of policy means we don't know the impact of making that particular decision, like I think you're looking at the health sector, you're looking at the housing sector. Who are the losers and what's the cost of implementing that policy? These are important questions, especially when you don't have the fiscal space. So government is being very messy. And I saw in one of the papers they were asking three questions. They were saying, are they clueless? Are they fumbling? Or are they competent? I would say there's also a fourth one, are they complicit? And I would say between clueless and complicit, government, that retreat, they really need to speak truth to themselves and say they have to do better for Kenyans. They have to show better leadership. They have to there's a way you implement things, even in private sector, even if in your home, you hopefully think things through, especially big decisions, before you implement. They're implementing without thinking, and they have too many hidden points. And so there are questions being asked about if everything's on the digital system, everyone's paying. So what are these extra charges? Where is that money going? If it's the housing levy, then these financiers, who are the underwriters behind the financiers? When we have organizations that do mortgages that are known to government that are already in partnership with private sector. So because, for instance, this the fuel deal, the government-to-government fuel deal went so badly, we are saying these schemes that we are being told are the solution, but don't have a policy framework, don't have an accountability framework, cannot be trusted. So government needs to, there are good ideas, whether it's the beta plan or the better plan, very good ideas. They need to be financed, but they need to be well structured, they need to be accountable.
Okay.
And that's what government agencies, like I said, the Parliamentary Budget Office has written out very clearly, you know, clear the pending
even on the
debts,
housing levy and raise some of the gaps.
clear pending, those pending bills,
Yes.
put money in the value chains because those are the multipliers. But now we hear there's an indiscipline, and it's being driven by, I had primitive corruption. It really is.
Yeah.
Corruption, drive. It just hasn't shown itself yet because it's looking very sophisticated, but that's what it is. They are interests.
All right.
Yvonne,
yes,
I just
Prof.
wanted to comment on this public participation.
Yeah.
In my view and from where I sit, I think it's one of the most misunderstood by Kenyans and also a lot of leaders. For example, you find there is, of course, public participation as a great value for this country, which Kenyans give themselves by arguing that if you have to make a decision that affects me, you need to consult me.
Yeah.
Therefore, we find that in the Constitution there is Article 10, 232, 234, which says whenever you are doing any policy, laws, regulations, plans, and even budgetary process, you need to involve people. But when I was preparing for this, I looked at the laws governing public participation, including what framework exists. And I could see some counties, a few counties have a very good law. One is Makueni, and I think we all know Makueni because of their public participation. They performed very well. Therefore, I think it's important that even as the government is looking for this retreat, to think what are some of the laws that are not yet into effect that could improve their performance. And public participation, I think, is one. And the way it has been done in the past, if you need first to create awareness and the purpose for that public participation, involvement in a structured manner, meeting all those stakeholders, and also giving a feedback mechanism. But you have seen public participation where, because members of parliament by Article 118, 1B are the one with that function, you find although they understand the need for this public participation, they just go and have 400 people in a hall and somebody presents for 3 hours and leaves. So how effective can that public participation be? And I think that's why you are seeing a lot of laws going back to the judiciary, and judiciary is actually determining them or finding them not constitutional. So I think we can retrace, because as Kikonya said, where there is no policy, there will be a lot of questions right from all people, because if you don't have a policy, then we do not even know how the government is addressing a certain challenge and how it can be measured. So I think it's very important for us to understand public participation enhances accountability, and even when they come to implementation, there is that legitimacy around the outcome. It also improves the decision making. I think that's the time you get new ideas, because I think every time we are improving through innovation. So I think I'm just trying to really articulate, if you want to enhance our democracy, public participation has been underrated. Yeah. And I think we need to go back. I was looking and I just realized we have a Bill 2023, Public Participation Bill 2023, September. I think they should now work with the Parliament really to finalize that bill, because they will give it a structure.
All right. I want us to now start to close our conversation. While I'm with you, Professor Kobia, I think in terms of optics and what we see with this cabinet, we've seen, it's robust conversation amongst themselves. But sometimes that robust conversation makes its way on onto the public sphere. On social media, we've seen a PS correcting a CS, who's his boss. We've seen a CS who would be making a statement that sometimes one would have thought would cause a diplomatic incident. And you wonder to what extent, I mean, there's freedom of speech, I guess, and freedom of expression, even amongst members of cabinet. In fact, just last week, we saw two cabinet secretaries differ on Twitter about, the mode of collecting royalties for musicians. I would just like to know what your take is on a matter like this, where, with all due respect and due to the one government approach that this is happening, but, this is my ministry, this is my docket, we shall be able to do that. What's your thought in terms of how this cabinet is conducting itself, or how a cabinet should conduct itself in the eyes of the public, even when they differ?
Thank you, Yvonne. A cabinet in any country or in any government is the highest governing body, which is respected and with a lot of honor. So therefore, they are also always need to have that induction, which gives the cabinet secretaries kind of an orientation to know how to relate with the public, how to relate with their colleagues, how to relate with those who are their direct reports, and also staff. I think it does show a very good picture when a cabinet minister or PS, something that should not have come out, comes out. I think it is a good kind of, it has come out, but I think in my view, what I would do is not prevent something like that coming out. This is what it is treated would say. What has worked with us very well in terms of relating with the others, and what needs improvement. I think that's how I would look at it, so that there is a decorum, there is an expectation of how our highest office of the cabinet, the president, because we don't want some of the embarrassments that start making Kenyans doubt, do we have the right people? So therefore, to me, at the same time, when people work as a big team, sometimes some discomfort and stepping on each other's toes cannot be avoided. But when it happens, it should be like the final. The retreat of this of government, they should be thinking that on these areas where we have noted there is some communication going through social media, there is the way we relate among ourselves as cabinet, they will need to make sure they have the decorum and how their character and behavior, because they are now leaders, they are the most watched. Therefore, they would make sure that it is during the time of their tenure, it is the time they constrain themselves and kind of cancel themselves, so that they are not like some of the things that have come out do not come out again. So it's not like a criticism, but it's just looking, well, how can we improve in some of the aspects that we have not done very well? Because they serve Kenyans. And when Kenyans start asking questions, why did that happen, definitely that would call for any retreat to reflect, how can we do better?
Okay.
Yeah.
Could I just chime in on that one and say that the conduct of cabinet members or team members is a reflection of the leadership style. So when you have a leadership style that maybe pits, encourages this competition, is using carrot and stick, is deriding team members in front of others, then you might pick that character. It's also an indication that that team is not reading on the same script, so that the leadership style is one where that consultation is not taking place. That affirmation, that reinforcing of ideas is not taking place. And so it's spilling over into the public domain. So I would say that retreat would do well to have maybe some leadership coaching. And every team, every board, committee, even, boards and maybe even staff teams should have the benefit of having external leadership development and coaching, and allowing some objective people to come in, have a look and assess you and give a reflection back to you, because the nation is suffering because of poor leadership. Of course, there are some who might say, you can't do much, But if I were to give a recommendation and be as generous as Professor Kombia, I would say let's try executive leadership coaching. I have my misgivings.
but also, Yvonne, let's not also forget there are normally individual differences.
Yeah.
The way Rugo would behave is different from the way...
Right.
Yeah, but the principles stay. Therefore, what I'm trying to say, there are those members of the cabinet because they need to get that leadership coaching so that they can know their temperament, how they appear.
Does that not happen at the Kenya School of Government, which you, headed?
Yes. I think the Kenya School of Government has a strategic leadership program which would include mentioning some of those, including even protocol and etiquette for the cabinet or for the principal secretary. So I think it's a matter of realizing, yes, we are not where we want to be, but we can go through some kind of coaching and without putting a lot of politics in this, because I think there's also a creation of Kenyans. Kenyans want to see you out there a lot, even if you are not really performing. Therefore, maybe that's why a lot of senior government officials might want to get into the media just for the purpose of being seen. But I think Kenyans don't just want to see you. They want to see your results. And I think if they see your results, your performance will speak louder than being just seen, maybe bring something small. So that because your colleague was seen the other day. And I think that also can introduce another dimension that people influencing how even they appear in the media, which I think it is not sustainable and is not the right thing to do. Thank you, Yvonne.
All right, thank you.
This is an interesting discussion, but I think it tells you that perhaps there is a huge gap that has had to do with us elevating the position of a person as opposed to building institutions. We seem to have this big celebration about the individual.
So, as opposed to the office.
As opposed to the office and the institutions, So, for instance, people remember the Ministry of Education when so-and-so was the cabinet secretary because he was out there, walking into different places and doing all manner of things. But what kind of structures were established that can sustain that kind of a performance? Because really that's legacy. Legacy is beyond what the individual does, but the kind of structures that are created for others to come and thrive. But I also hold the view that not everybody in a leadership position is a leader, and therefore sometimes we shouldn't confuse the two. Just the fact that somebody is in a certain position does not necessarily endear them to leadership, to becoming a leader immediately, and therefore the place of training, the place of support, the place of engagement, I think becomes critical. But having said that, I was just listening to my two colleagues here, and I'm just wondering, what would success for the next year look like, assuming that you are setting a strategy? For the next year. So when they gather again in a year's time, what will they be talking? Will they be talking about? Will there be more Kenyans who have food on the table? Will the poverty rates that is currently at 40% have come down? Would we be, the BPS, the budget policy statement, talks about feeding 16 million children. We are still investigating how that number will be fed with less money than what was feeding 1.6 million children. Will more children actually be, getting food wherever they are going? Would more mothers be delivering in safe spaces? Would more traders be able to actually participate in business, not be harassed by government and tax officials, but rather be supported to produce? Would more families be able to basically meet their aspirations? Because that's the essence of a sovereign country, where everybody... I think, for me, those are the questions that, if they are not being answered, it doesn't matter what form and structure of government you adopt for yourself. But more importantly, we have a crisis, which I think is important for us to speak about. We have Kenyans who have worked and served this country in very distinguished ways, but now are languishing because we are yet to process pensions. 34%, according to the number that she mentioned, are they. But secondly, we have about, and Prof, please correct me if I'm wrong, we have almost 60% of the public service coming into retirement time in the next year or so. It started from the last, from 2020, because that was the last batch that was employed after the structural adjustment programs.
Yes, yes.
So they are coming to a time of retirement. Some have continued to work because they can also see those who left before them have not been given pension. So why leave? You know, just continue to work. These are not people who can unionize. They don't even have the energy. They are our parents. They are our grandparents. Some have worked within the police. Some have worked as teachers. And this is part of the critical liability that we are talking. We are not counting it as part of public debt, but it's actually a debt.
Yeah, isn't it? Because
it's a
out of the consolidated fund, there are two things that must be paid
public
first.
Debt
Pensions and public debt.
Public debt.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to, for that conversation, I hope it will come up.
Yeah.
But secondly, is the whole discussion around pending bills. There was an article, I mean, one of the news items actually here was on pending bills that are held by state corporations, by public universities, by national government ministries, departments and agencies, and by county government.
Yes.
Who do these pending bills belong to? They belong to Kenyan business people, men and women, many of whom fall in that AGPO group, basically providing certain supplies, and many are languishing actually. You know? And these are the things that then start to build, by addressing such, you start to build confidence that there is something you're doing, you're deliberate about you know, empowering people. You're not out to victimize them or to take advantage of them. But lastly, is the decisions that have been made in the education sector, which for me I think is important to talk about. We have a crisis that is brewing in national school, in public boarding schools especially. At least day schools, children go home.
Yeah.
But boarding schools, they sleep there. We have intakes as high as 600 from once, but we don't have a matching infrastructure development happening. I mean, what kind of confidence, what kind of humans and individuals, workforce, are we preparing? You know, with that kind of, you know, that all you need to do through is just go through this system. Yeah. What matters is access. Quality can come later. I think these are the kind of conversations that are critical right now because they affect households. And they affect the future of those households and the future of our country.
Okay, interesting. You know, there was set to be a press conference, I believe it was late last week, from that pending bills task force that was set up by the president. I believe it's being headed by the former Auditor General, Edward Oko, where they were to give, you know, a status. And we understand they've been collecting data from all the government agencies to tell us just where we are. And some of those pending bills, you know, date
2012.
Yes. And beyond, by the way. Almost 500 billion shillings that is being held by government. You can imagine if even just a fraction of that were to be released into the economy, the effect that that would have in terms of just spurring growth, incomes, and therefore that, you know, also goes into increasing or rather collecting more taxes. So some interesting things. Just a final word from you on what you think would be the outcome of this retreat. Maybe some 2-3 important things that for you need to come out, if you can, in a...
Well, the public sector service report of 2020 to 2023 that was released in December calls for behavior change and the need to emphasize commitment in promoting values and principles. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here is a deficit in that because we don't have a legal problem. Our law is fine. We have a compliance problem that's driven us into, you know, this debt kind of fiscal crunch that we are in. And a lot of the issues we are discussing here are compliance issues. But then we also have a problem of the decisions being made, the choices being made by government. Some of them are extremely suspect, and whether they are being driven by interest, public, you know, selfish interest, or whether they are just poor decisions. We are having some decisions that are very questionable and that are hurting Kenyans and likely to hurt Kenyans more. Now that becomes a lot difficult to deal with because those are political choices. But I would really, I hope there are candid conversations happening in Naivasha, and I hope there is listening happening. The last thing, of course, as the Parliamentary Budget Office says, the government is walking a tightrope. And I think, as the Okoa Uchumi campaign has been saying, we need transparency, we need openness to the public, the priorities need to be clearly defined and adhered to. So some discipline, and not some, a lot of discipline and accountability if the government is going to prevent us careening off the cliff, the economic cliff, which is looking increasingly likely.
Okay, thank you for that. Prof, you get the final word.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I then will have
Okay, I thought you'd sum it up, all right.
Yeah. No, I think for me, two things.
Yeah.
I think it's not too late to face some of the major projects that the current government wants to do. There seems to be a sense in which everything has to be done now. Kama sio sasa ni sasa hivi, you know, that kind of ideology. I think that is hurting a lot, because then it means you have to split your monies in too many different directions.
And you're under pressure.
And you're under pressure to do this, to do that, to do that. I don't think Kenyans who, would be so ununderstanding if we said we can delay 2, 3 things, or we can face things, so that then we are able to go over the kind of cash demand that we currently have. But more importantly, and I want to emphasize something Wanjiru has said, I think the current government, the current president, I think need to listen more to Kenyans. There's a lot of views that have been given, opinions that have been shared, memorandums that have been prepared, thoughts even on how to turn around some of these sectors of the economy that have already been provided, but then you see sometimes just the opposite being done. I think it's time to listen. I think a big part of healing a nation is listening to each other, so that then we are able to provide solutions to each other, because this is our country, and I think it is in the interests of every Kenyan that this government succeeds in the right way. You know, so that then we all can be able to benefit for our country. So we continue the conversations. And for members of parliament, it's time to discuss the budget policy statement. What a great opportunity they have to course correct some of the things that really we need to fix in the coming days. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Yvonne. My final thoughts are in 3 areas. One, I think, as we discuss here, we are not necessarily criticizing, because criticizing is one of the easiest things to do. But we are giving kind of constructive criticism, which can provide solutions, which actually holds the promise for a better inclusive future for all Kenyans. My second point is true. At the retreat, I'm sure they will be having a lot of lists to do. And in that list to do, I think I want to join my colleague to say, you cannot be able to do everything within a year. Can we prioritize? If I was asked what areas should we prioritize, for sure I would prioritize health. I would also prioritize education, and more so university education, because I think we have seen the struggles of funding within the university. We are starting to see issues regarding to access, quite a number of people not being able to access, the quality we need also to evaluate, and how relevant is the kind of education that we have. Finally, I think in this retreat, we should also think, how best can we work better? I was just sharing with my colleagues here, the issue of National Hospital Insurance Fund parking. The contract was given 2002. It got to complete 2008. And you see today, 2024, when now members of parliament are going to reverse it and really raise issues. And I think then as Kenyans, we have to think there's a better way of really doing things. Let's think. I think in that retreat, they could come up with what are some of the things that we should write off. And maybe even if we have to follow up with the people who are responsible, then also the whole time of parliament and executive is not spent on really reflecting 15 or 20 years back. Let me finally say that I think when we talk about the government, we are talking about the executive, we are talking about the parliament, judiciary, and the commissions therein. Therefore, they need to move together and to respect each other and to find space to consult so that Kenyans will get value for the money that they have given the government to work for them, for us. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for what has been a very comprehensive take on the government, its performance, and what we hope to see following this government retreat that is on its second day in Naivasha. I thank you very much, Professor Margaret Kobia, Dr. Abraham Rugo, and Wanjiru Gikonyo, as always, for sharing your insights and time with us here on The Explainer tonight. Let's take a break. We have more news coming, including why it's been rather hot in Nairobi lately. We'll be right back.